Continuando, coffee associations are key stakeholders in advocating before governments for fair legal conditions. Our next panel will discuss how legal affairs impacts coffee producers. Please welcome Mr. Michael von Leur, Secretary General of the Swiss Coffee Trade Association, who will moderate our next panel.
Thanks for giving me the hardest job after lunch. Before we start, I would also like to invite our co-panelists here to come up. So Noelia Villalobos, I guess no introduction needed. Juan Esteban Orduz, representing today the World Coffee Producer Forum, but of course also Colombia. Bill Murray, you have heard him already yesterday. And then Marcos Matos from Brazil. So I think we got a quite complete panel today. All right, let them take a seat. So my name is Michael von Leur. I'm the Secretary General of the Swiss Coffee Trade Association. The association members account for more than 50% of globally traded coffee. So size comes with obligation. Obviously, we are very much interested in not only the legislative issues impacting producing countries, but also bridging to producing countries. So first, I wanted to thank Sintercafé for inviting us as associations to your great event and beautiful country. And I can admit it's the first time that I'm in Costa Rica. Fantastic. Thanks so much. Then this panel is basically a continuation of our collaboration, which we started 4 or 5 years ago to bring exactly consuming and producing countries associations together. In a minute, you will hear why this matters and why it also impacts you. The title of our panel is How Consuming Country Legislation is Impacting Producing Countries, which you might have seen in the program. While we are very much aligned on these issues, please make active use of being here, of all of us being here. Ask questions. Don't be shy. I was surprised that nobody dared to ask a question. But please ask. There are no dumb questions, only dumb answers. So don't be shy. And as a starting point, I just wanted to give some general comments about the legislative pressure we are facing in Europe and in the US, but also in Japan and Korea, which might be a little bit more under the radar because it doesn't get so much publicized. The first takeaway, legislation has departed, the train left the station, and it's on its way, and it's impacting the entire supply chain. So it's, I think, the very first big takeaway. Then these legislations are addressing the issues on human and labor rights. That's, for the moment, the first focus. Environmental topics. We have heard many things you do great in this country or on this continent. Reduction of carbon footprint. Everybody talking about it. It's not only the kind of the countries and the governments, but also the private sector. Improved agricultural practices with reduced fertilizer and pesticide usage, basically coming from the EU. Let's see how that pans out. And one point I wanted to make is, for the first time, these legislations are having a direct impact on producing countries outside the US, outside the EU. And it's something which, to be honest, we as associations, we are not feeling entirely comfortable with, because there has been no dialogue between those legislators and basically you. I can ask the question, who has been asked by any EU politician or member of the EU Commission? My bet would be 0. Good, I was right on that one. So it's important that we understand that this is impacting you as a producing country, and since I'm having here a dual role of talking. I will cover, obviously, the European side, but I will also moderate, and I will give the word now to Bill. Give us a quick update on what is happening in the U.S. Bill, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Michael. I think one of the most important things that we should start with is that we need regulation. We have these conversations. We talk very negatively about our politicians, about the regulators. The fact is, we all welcome a certain amount of regulation. We can't operate in a system that's the absolute Wild West. And regulations can help us, especially if they are crafted with some reflection of the reality of our business. I mentioned yesterday that our politicians in the U.S., right now they're looking at the health aspects of drinking coffee. This is a very favorable type of regulation. If our government issues a new rule and it says coffee is healthy and it's good for you, we would all welcome that. The difficulty is our regulators, they're responsible for regulating every single sector of our economy. They can't possibly be experts in everything they regulate. And that's why it's necessary for all of us to step up, to educate our regulators, and to make sure they understand the realities that we face. Michael mentioned some of the negative aspects of regulation, regulations that are drafted without consideration of the realities of our business. We're looking potentially at a situation like that in the U.S. right now. On October 18th, President Biden issued a request for public input. He asked for that input with respect to potential deforestation legislation. He's focused on a number of specific commodities: beef cattle, cocoa, coffee, rubber, wood, soy, and palm oil. And the questions the administration is asking in the U.S. are what I would call leading questions. You can often tell when somebody asks you a question what they're thinking. So you can tell by the way these questions have been asked. For example, should we outlaw the importation of such commodities if there's a lack of proof that they've not been cultivated on deforested land? How can you prove a negative? This tells us what the administration is thinking. So I think from our perspective, it's imperative that we start to have our administration understand that coffee is different. That's the absolute first issue. We're not beef cattle, we're not soy, we're not palm oil, we're not rubber, we're not wood. We are different. And that's the first step to make sure that we're just not grouped indiscriminately with other drivers of deforestation. The second question then is what can be done. And I think from our perspective, and this is something that I've seen just in the week that I've been here in Costa Rica, it's imperative that that discussion shifts to what we are already doing. Because the answer to the regulation isn't to come up with something in an air-conditioned office in Washington that we think just makes sense because theoretically it makes sense. The answer really is to look at what each and every one of you have already been doing for years and ask the question, how can we work with government? How can we get the assistance we need? And how can we accelerate the changes that we already are enabling in our everyday farming and in our practices everywhere? So our input into the administration is due by December 2nd. It's a very short timetable. What happens next? The administration takes this into account. The U.S. State Department makes regulations or recommendations. And then the question is, where does it go from here? In our country, because of the political situation, it's probably unlikely that we're going to see actual legislation because congressionally, getting anything done is quite difficult. However, the president does have a certain amount of latitude through decree or executive order to put things in place. So this really is an initiative for us to start to educate our politicians about how different coffee is, about what we're all doing, about how they can work with us, instead of asking us questions like, shouldn't we stop coffee coming in from certain places because we think there might be an issue. So overall, that's the perspective, but there's a certain amount of urgency right now, driven by the politics, driven by consumers, and driven by the administration, which feels a necessity to do something quickly. 1 year ago, at the last UN Climate Summit back in October, the Biden administration made a commitment to take certain action relatively quickly. So they're working to fulfill that promise, and of course, there are political dimensions, but real-world dimensions as well. So this will be a priority for us in the U.S. because I think there's no better example of how we're connected, not just through the supply chain, but through legislation, regulation, and what our politicians are doing, either to help us or to hurt us. Michael?
Perfect. All right. Thanks very much, Bill. So I will talk a little bit about the EU, what's going on in the EU. May I have the slide up, the one slide? I will keep it very short. The overarching policy frame is coming from the Green Deal. I spare you the details of the Green Deal. I think we would be still sitting here tomorrow if we looked at all the details. Essentially, what the Green Deal is the alignment of the EU to the Sustainable Development Goals. And the agenda is driving, obviously, everything from biodiversity, human rights, to all the environmental aspects, and the transformation of agriculture. And this is where the link again comes in here to the producing countries. The change of the agricultural agenda, reduction of pesticide usage by 30% by 2030, 50% reduction of fertilizer usage by 2030. These are massive changes to European culture. Nobody looked at what are the implications. We have a food security. I mean, I don't want to get too far out now, but we're having food security issues around the world. But basically, the policy, the Green Deal, is telling European farmers, produce less, produce more organic, and just change the system, how you are producing. So that's the message. How is this translating to producing countries is via the import regime, the so-called, for those who understand a little bit, the import regime, the minimum residue levels, and basically trade tariffs. I don't think it was a smart way to connect those two things of legislation, European legislation, to trade tariffs. And you will hear already the reaction of some of the producing countries later on from Marcos. So if I'm looking at the most burning issues, due diligence, this morning I would have told you due diligence in the EU will come sometime. It came this morning. So the parliament voted in favor of due diligence regulations and a regime for large corporations. They have to report all social and environmental impact figures, KPIs, going forward. The interesting thing is there was no date and no details. Typical EU. Sorry for the sarcastic comment. We have to find out what it means. But again, due diligence will come. It means also for producing countries that traders, roasters will ask for a lot of data from you as associations and from you as producers. So that's coming. Deforestation legislation, we talked already a lot over the last 3 days. This is also en route. It's coming. In the EU, I could put a timeline. It's in the making. We have been, as a sector, we have been fighting the rules hard. We did not fight the principle. We just want to be very clear. 3 years ago, we were approached by the EU Commission. We made a positive statement. The sector is ready to go for deforestation-free supply chains, and we made at the same time a proposal of how do we get there. I mean, if I was a politician and I'm getting presented a proposal by the private sector, I would say, fantastic, okay, let's do it. But they opted for a different way, and today we are having a legislation where basically where we are obliged, would be obliged, as traders and roasters to document each and every polygon of a coffee bean in a container. I don't need to ask anybody here how practical this is. I mean, this is what we are fighting against. Then the pesticides, the ban of prohibited substances. There's a long list. I've seen for coffee 240 pesticides and substances on the list. 10 to 15 are on the short list. The most urgent one is glyphosate. I don't know the use of glyphosate here in Costa Rica, but obviously for Brazil and for Vietnam, real issue, big issues. So glyphosate, there will be a definite decision on December 15th by the EU whether to ban glyphosate within the EU. What we don't know are the ramifications on the import side, which means the MRLs. Will they lower the MRLs, and what will happen? So just keep it on your radar, keep it on your list, and whoever is using glyphosate might not be able to use it in the future. Requires adjustment to our agricultural practices. And then the environmental impact reporting, carbon footprint, they changed here my voiceover a little bit because they packaged the environmental impact reporting into the due diligence reporting. The last word on due diligence, Switzerland is a forerunner in terms of due diligence. We are implementing our due diligence legislation as of January 23, so around the corner. And we are the first country in the world. The Swiss government admitted there is no similar case. There's nothing to learn from. And they basically said, okay, start the mapping of supply chain risks, start highlighting what are the major risk countries, and have an action plan for improvement. I think very straightforward, nothing too aggressive, and collaborative approach. So it will come. Probably you will hear it also from some of the Swiss-based companies. But this is what's going on in Europe. And of course, Switzerland is not part of the EU. In one way or the other, over time, the EU regulations will also be adapted to Switzerland. And a part of the importance of green trading, Switzerland is also a large exporter of finished goods. So it has ramifications for the sector. All right, so this is all what I wanted to say on the EU. Probably more than enough on the details. So let's move south to Brazil. And Marcos, give us an update on how do you and Brazil, how you are perceiving these legislative pressures, what you have been doing, and of course, Secafe and us collectively, we have worked very closely together to address some of these issues. Marcos.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Noelle, for the invitation. I'm honored to be here, my first time in Costa Rica. Michael, collaboration, cooperation is the name of the game. We alone, we can do almost nothing. In challenging geopolitical times, we know that multilateralisms and trade agreements encourage the global trade. In opposite, unilateralism and trade barriers, and we do believe that the new regulations put pressures on the trade flow, costs, bureaucracy, disincentivizing purchase from smallholders. It destroys values. We know that we spent decades-long advances in social inclusion. In our opinion, we have to invite people, politicians, the parliament, to visit Costa Rica, visit Colombia, visit Brazil, to check our realities, our commitments assumed, our efforts made, our reality. It's the only way. In European Union legislation, the Parliament approved in September. We need the Council final decision, and 1 year, a year and a half for implementing phase. That's the period that we need to work together, because we don't know. Michael mentioned the polygons from the areas. What the size of that polygons for each rural property or a small, medium, great area? Because if you work together, you can minimize some impacts. Of course, it's put a lot of pressures, costs, bureaucracy. It concerns us a lot. And when we are working together, that panel is very good. Because of that, we did the same in Switzerland, a fantastic event, and now Sintercafé, fantastic opportunity. Together, we can exchange ideas. The previous panel, carbon balance, we are registering our methodology right now with StoneX, the additionality of carbon, the digital inclusion, the capacity building programs for farmers, the water footprint, many things we can exchange ideas, work together, because we promote income, we promote social inclusion. We know that we can prove with official data, the Human Development Index, it's United Nations. We just analyze where coffee is presented, the Human Development Index is better. With the large area of coffee, the better the human. We can reach high levels in similar advanced economies. So the science with us, it's our side. Let's work together to face that challenge.
Thank you, Marcos. And later on, we're going to get back to probably one of the nice political questions, what's going to happen next after the new president was elected. But let's keep that for the questions and answers. And also for you to ask questions. Noelia, as a host, so tell us, you have been doing, as Costa Rica, you have been doing so much, and what do you see as a threat, as an opportunity, and how will Costa Rica need to react to all these legislations coming from Europe and the US?
Well, as Marcos just said, I think collaboration is the name of the game. These conversations that we've started a couple of years ago is what needs to happen. From the producing side, we need to understand exactly through Michael, through Bill, what the legislators, what are the implications for our producing countries. But also, we've been working a lot, giving you information about, and that you could use in all the paperwork you have to present to your legislators on how, of the work we're doing, as Michael said, as Bill said, sorry, coffee is very different. And we have seen it throughout all the presentations here at Sintercafé, what the coffee industry is doing, not only in Costa Rica, which I'm very proud of, but in other producing countries. So I think this collaboration have to keep going. We have to stay together, work together, and as Marco said, bring them down, show them how we are different, so that we can move forward together. And we cannot change from today to tomorrow. We need time. We need time to adapt to all these legislations. So your slide was a little dark. So I would like to see the glass half full, in addition that we have, we're starting on a good, on the right side, working together and with this collaboration.
I like that. I like that comment a lot. The glass is half full and being optimistic and positive. Fantastic. Thanks, Marcos and Noelia, for your specific country insights, and I think very good bridge now to Juan Esteban, being here as representative for the World Coffee Producer Forum, but also don't miss out to tell us about Colombia, what you're doing.
Thank you, Michael. Let me start by telling an anecdote. When I first came to the U.S., I came as Deputy Ambassador of Colombia in Washington, D.C., and I was part of the group that the president put in place. It was 1998, some of the worst times in Colombia in terms of security, kidnappings, drug trafficking, and so on. And that program called Plan Colombia ended up being the biggest security program between the U.S. and a country that was not Israel or Egypt. Colombia became the third recipient of aid after Israel and Egypt. And that allowed Colombia to defeat FARC and later down the road sign a peace agreement. And we're still struggling, but in much better shape than 20 years ago. At a meeting that we were having at the International Relations Committee, Foreign Relations Committee in the Senate, at the time the chair was a right-wing Republican called Jesse Helms. And the leader of the majority was Senator Joe Biden. And we were sitting there accompanying the president and the ambassador and the minister of foreign affairs. And Joe Biden said, Mr. President, President Pastrana, I think it's great that you're trying to do this, but I just don't believe in your Plan Colombia. I believe that drug trafficking, the drug issue, is a public health issue. It's not an interdiction or security issue. We need to deal with it, but getting people to not consume drugs and to treat people who are sick with being addicts to drugs. Fast forward, we were able to invite and get Joe Biden to go to Colombia. He spent a few days there. And we had a lot of meetings with every possible authority and NGOs and people and so on. And when he came back to the U.S., he said, the first time he was on the floor in the Senate, he said, I was wrong. I realized by going to Colombia how difficult Colombians have it because of drugs. I want to build on something that Marco said. We don't just need to tell the story. One of the biggest challenges that we have is not the legislation. We have the issue, no one's can be against deforestation or against fighting deforestation. The Americans have an expression that I love, which is, that's motherhood and apple pie. Who can be against that? Nobody. But the question is, how do we do it? And how do we tell the story to those people sitting in Brussels or wherever they're sitting from many, many countries that have never set foot on a producing country and never set foot on a farm and have no clue what happens in the field. It doesn't matter how much good faith you base your actions on. If you're not in touch with reality, there's no way it can work, it can have a proper job. To wrap up, the thing is, I think one of the key challenges is we cannot, and Michelle said, we don't oppose the principle. We cannot oppose the principle. But the methodology, how it's going to be done, that's what is on discussion. And that's where we need to build, and something Bill said was very, very to the point, is we need to work together. Not in the sense, because every coffee meeting you go, everybody talks about collective action and working together, and nothing happens. We need to be serious about this. This is a life or death situation for coffee farmers and for the coffee industry. This is a very serious threat. I think it's, funny enough, as serious as climate change. And we need to work together. What have we done as the World Coffee Producers Forum that is the groups, association of coffee producers from all over the world, that the Colombian Coffee Federation is leading. I want to thank Roberto Vélez, our CEO, who has allowed to have the resources from the Federation be put at the disposal of the group for us to be able to support these causes. What do we need to do? We already work with the ECF. We've been working with NCA. We're working with SCTA. We sent a letter to the European Parliament. We're working with the European Commission and trying to get them to understand what happens on the ground. Because, again, it's not what they do, it's how they do it. And we need to have a voice on how it's done. Maybe something that Michael mentioned, I'm not sure if you mentioned or not, it was when you get the legislation out of the parliament, it's going to be a general thing. When you go to the rulings, to the regulamentation, it goes by sector. So this is the moment where we have to be working together, exercising our influence, and working in lobbying, sending letters, and bringing European bureaucracy, I don't say it's in a dismissive way at all, to go to producing countries. If not, we go to Brussels and we sit down with them and we explain them how it's done. We can have, ICAFE.com, Reprome Cafe, AFCA in Africa, European Indian Coffee Trust, VCOFA. Everybody's very active in the forum. So that's what we're trying to do, to build the critical mass, to make sure that they understand what happens on the ground, and to have a voice and an influence not on the principle, but on the how it's going to be implemented. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you. A lot of very good points, and I'm happy that you mentioned the sense of urgency. The glass is half full, but the timeline is getting shorter, and we have to act. So from my side, also a pledge to the producing countries, help us to provide the data, create transparency. Facts and figures should, even in Brussels or in DC, speak louder than those who are making just noise. So that's a pledge I'm having to all of you. I pre-prepared a couple of questions I'm asking the panelists, and then we are opening up also for questions by the audience. So Bill, I would start with you as, in my view, great communication expert and very close also to the consumers in the US. So how will the NCA keep members informed and linked to Washington? So 2 questions in one.
Well, a couple of very interesting questions. We have our typical communications with our members, newsletters, webinars. I think the more interesting aspect of your question, Michael, is what we're going to be doing in Washington. We're going to be setting up a new committee of our member companies. A number of our companies, especially our larger companies, they have full-time representatives in Washington. We're getting them together, we're organizing them, and we're going to be speaking up, all of us together, with one voice in an organized fashion. This gets to one of Steven's point about working together. The other related piece of this is to look at the political system and see how the political system works. For example, if you have a coffee retailer and it's all across the country, and it's in every political jurisdiction across the country, it's extremely helpful to work with that retailer because they have a direct point of contact with every senator, every congressperson, every single politician in the country. So the question is, how do we create a mechanism, a structure, to not only keep our members up to date on what we're working on, but to mobilize them, to engage them? And I really want to come back to one of Steven's point. It's no longer a question of talking about this, it's what can we do? If we can get a couple hundred people across the country, business people, to contact their congressional representatives, their senators, that starts to shift perceptions and ultimately change the regulatory process.
Thank you very much. I noted down a couple of more questions for you, Bill, which you would have expected, of course. So, will showcasing producing countries help to create this public awareness? Things like, for instance, Costa Rica preparing a nice presentation, videos, whatever, and you distribute this as NCA, not only to your members, but also to the lawmakers. Does this create impact?
Yeah, absolutely. I know probably not a lot of you know, I used to work in the motion picture industry, which was kind of interesting. My name is Bill Murray in the motion picture industry, but not that guy, of course. When I first came to the National Coffee Association, before I started in this position, Juan Esteban and the Federation invited me to come to Colombia. We spent 2 weeks all over the country. My eyes were opened instantly about the reality of coffee. I will forever be grateful to the trip that I took, your hospitality. You remember we were, I think, in a different hotel every night all across the country, right? We need to do this with our congressional representatives. We need to do this with the career diplomats, with the State Department. So absolutely showcasing what's happening in country is critical. The question is how we do it to get maximum leverage out of it. And this is going to be something we're going to be working on.
Thanks, Bill. Very, very clear. And I hope we see a lot of movies. All right, then turning to Brazil, before I turn the question over to Marcos. What has happened in all these legislative discussions we had in Europe was that Brazil basically was sidelined. You can guess why. Politically, they were not so popular in the EU. The whole Amazon deforestation discussion was or is hanging over the relationships, which made it for us super hard to gain traction. Whether we want it or not, Brazil is the largest coffee producer, should have a seat at the table. And now my question to Marcos, what's going to change with Lula taking office on January 1st?
Michael, it's a difficult question, but I have some words. So, in Brazil, in October, we had an election. Lula was elected, and the Congress, the Parliament, in the same way. Nowadays, actually, the speech is causing some fears, imbalances, because Brazil has a fiscal challenge to attend the poorest people. It's in fact, you have to solve that problems with our budget. But the same way, our Congress, it's interesting to mention, the agribusiness sector has the biggest interest group in the parliament. We are the majority force in the parliament. When I say we, not just coffee. Coffee is just 2% of Brazilian exports. We are the biggest producer, the biggest exporter, and the second consumer in the world. But coffee in Brazil, is the number 5 in the list. We, together, there is a think tank, it's called Agribusiness Institute, Brazilian Agribusiness Institute, represent 50 organizations, the agribusiness organizations. And we, technical analysis, and for our group of interest in the parliament, we are working together. So we have the directions, we have the priorities, the infrastructure, the regulations, the new laws, the agrochemicals, how to maximize the bioinputs. Everything is in our agenda. So I think the communication we can do better, especially the next period of the president. We need to work better, especially the statistics. For us, statistics is very important. When we say deforestation, what really I mean? It's the different, the legal suppressions, and deforestation, it's connected to agribusiness or connected to illegal activities in Amazon. It's nothing related to agribusiness, not even cotton, because soybean, we have the Amazon moratorium. Companies don't buy soybean from the deforestation. So we are organizing this system in this sense, but we have to promote communicating, the promotion of our image, and we need to explain better what's going on in Amazon. And of course, we have to act. We are against deforestation, as Mr. Juan Bordus mentioned. We are against illegalities, all illegalities. The social laws, the labor laws, unacceptable working conditions, everything. We have a good project in Brazil, the well-being to improve living and the working conditions for farmers and employees. We know the Global Coffee Platform, that's a huge project there. So is that we are against illegalities, and we need to improve our communication. Maybe we can do it better in the next period.
Thank you very much, Marcos. We are still curious what's happening on January 1st, but
Me too.
we all of us. Noelia, moving back to Costa Rica, which is so advanced on the sustainability agenda, which we have heard and seen over the last 2 days. Actually, I had the pleasure also going up country and see it with my own eyes. Very interesting experience. So it's so ingrained in your thinking and acting. How can Costa Rica scale and share that experience? Well, I'll keep the second question for after.
Okay. Well, I guess we can learn from each other, every producing country, but I do think that I would like to share 3 lessons that we've learned that I think we've applied and can say that it's been a successful outcome. So I'm going to actually start with the third one I had here because I want to take on what Bill said at the beginning about the norms and legislations. producing countries need norms and legislation as well. So I think we need laws and legislations to have a clear governance of all the different parts of the sectors. And in Costa Rica, we have ICAFE doing that, which helps out all the sectors do their part and be able to have this success at the end of the coffee chain. Also, I think a producer, to be successful and have continuity in their life, in their sustainable business, they need 3 basic elements. So number 1, they need technical training and finance support to develop well on the field. They need guarantee of have a decent income, but not just a living income. They also need an income to be able to invest back to the field. And then they need access to social security for the producing families and their pickers every harvest. I mean, and these are elements that Costa Rica is doing, and these are the things that I think we've been able to be successful about. And then also talking about the realistic issues, we need to be realistic and create realistic scenarios for the producers where producers can be involved and be allowed to generate the sustainable ecosystems that are able to keep us producing coffee. Example in Costa Rica, Nama Cafe, payment for environmental services, and projects like that.
Thank you very much. A lot of good points. Probably we get also questions afterwards from the audience. One of the questions I would have, having attended here the event, with many representatives from Mexico down to Panama, is there a potential for a pan-Central American solution in terms of getting together, addressing legislative issues?
I hope, and I think it's happening. I mean, we have the Producers Coffee Forum, we have Prome Café. So I think we're taking steps. The important thing is that these different semi-governmental or non-governmental associations get involved, and we're not just waiting for help from other countries or for specific projects to be held. Just move forward in collaboration and in unity.
Okay, thank you very much. Last, not least, I will make a couple of comments from a Swiss perspective and the EU perspective. Eileen Gordon, who is the Secretary General of the European Coffee Federation, she could not be with us. We split kind of responsibilities. I'm here at Sinter Cafe, she's in Brazil, to represent, of course, also the ECF, the European interests there. So I'm starting with the SCTA, what we are doing. So we are working directly with the Swiss government. Maybe since we are a smaller country, it's easier to have access, but it's also the mindset that the Swiss government appreciates and encourages private sector engagement, and there's a constant feedback loop. At the end of the day, the government understood legislation will only work if it's practical and it's realistic for implementation. So I think that's one of the key takeaways in Switzerland. Then we are also advancing the overall sustainability agenda together with the government for the entire commodity sector. Just as a number, the commodity trading sector in Switzerland accounts for 4% of GDP. So it's a quite important industry and our sector of the Swiss economy. Then what we are also doing is we are working and collaborating closely with other commodities. Obviously, the issues we hear about legislation, they are not coffee specific. They are cocoa, they are soy, there's palm. We stay out of timber and cattle. That's not our core competence, but obviously everything what is tree crop is very close, and even soybeans not being a tree crop but a row crop. So these are sectors we are coordinating with, And especially on the cocoa side, we have in Switzerland, the Swiss Cocoa Platform, and we are about to create also a Swiss coffee platform. It has nothing to do with organizations like GCP or any competition, but it's for the Swiss sector to get together on sustainability topics, run projects, and also align the sector needs of sustainability to the government needs, or vice versa. Obviously, we want to be aligned with the legislation and be sure that the legislators understand what can we really deliver. At the end of the day, realistic implementation. Then on the ECF side, the European side, I think one of the keys was, of course, working very closely with the producing countries and bringing in the diplomatic representations. So be it in London, where most of the producing countries are having their diplomatic representatives for Europe, but also in Europe, in Brussels itself, and to align the language between the diplomatic corps, the private sector, and the associations. I think it was one of the, especially in the case of Brazil, this alignment was one of the major contributors to change the perception and awareness what is coffee in Europe. And then we talked a lot about transparency through facts and figures. I think that's, for me, that's the key, that's the path for us. And I reiterate my pledge, let's work together. We are in this together. There is no country better than the other. We are all in the same boat, and let's row into the same direction. I would say we keep it here. Juan Esteban will talk about the World Coffee Producer Forum in more detail afterwards. And certainly some of the topics we have discussed here will come up again. And we are, from our perspective, association's perspective, very glad that we have the World Coffee Producer Forum, which allows us as consuming country associations to reach out directly to producers. One number on the consuming country associations, so Eileen is not here, so Europe, Bill, NCA, SCTA, and then we got also the British Coffee Association. We are accounting for about 80% of world coffee consumption. So I think it's a very powerful group of people, and coordinating, collaborating is certainly making, or can make, a difference and a change. So I think we can go to questions and answers. I don't know how we are doing on time.
I think we might have time for one question.
One question.
For someone else, not me? No.
Okay. Yes?
I'm Monica Walker from Walker Coffee Trading. I've been coming to Sintercafé for about 30 years with Carl, my husband, to SCA about the same. And we have seen, I want to talk for myself, but I have seen how the different associations have evolved and have gone through the tough times and so forth. And I'm very glad that you mentioned the topic of transparency, good communication, and especially not to be competing against each other, because the associations, each one have a value, and each one differentiates each other in different ways. And I think when we talk about sustainability, transparency, it doesn't only translate into the coffee industry as such, but within each company. If each company is in charge of being transparent within themselves, that's going to project in the outside world. So, like, say, I always envision this type of situation, seeing people from different countries discussing the same topic of coffee, our coffee industry, which we love very much. And I think if we can talk in a civilized way, that's what makes the difference for change. Because we are supposed to be adults. So I think that's the main point. I think that, and I'm all for it. I've always enjoyed helping the different associations or giving my input. But sometimes you have to say what you think and not to say what people want to hear. So rocking the boat is what makes the change happen, and you do it in a very polite way. You don't have to offend anybody. But I think this is a good start. So I will encourage even from Bill to go to Colombia, maybe to also export and so forth, Noelia. I don't know, there's so much that you can do. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Since this was more of a statement and positive encouragement for us, associations, I would think we should get one question. The last one. Anybody? Sorry? Okay. All right. All right, then, thanks very much. And we are leaving the stage for Juan Esteban.